Hello, today is Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. I'm Tony Mangino from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. When the last sticking point in your negotiation is resolved, the commercial deal can be handed over to the lawyers for drafting. But how can you be sure that the terms, conditions, and pricing that you fought so hard for will actually make it into the contract as intended? Understanding the potential pitfalls and planning for the complexity of transitioning your deal from commercial agreement to final contracts is key to a successful outcome. I'm joined today by Larry York, Executive Director at TC2, and Sara Crifasi, Counsel at LB3. On today's podcast, we're going to discuss the importance of a coordinated deal handoff from the business team to legal. Sara and Larry, thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks, Tony. Glad to be here again.
Yeah, great to be here, Tony.
So let's get right into it. Sara, why is it important to have a coordinated handoff from the business team to the legal team?
Well, in the simplest terms, a thoughtful, well-planned transition from business to legal just substantially increases the likelihood of translating the business agreement into enforceable contract language as accurately and efficiently as possible. As you all know, legal teams from the supplier side are experts in negotiating terms that reflect a watered-down interpretation of their obligations, which, left unchecked, can fundamentally alter the business deal that was negotiated. It's really helpful in my work to have both a clear understanding of the key terms that were agreed on, as well as the supporting details to best facilitate the contract drafting.
Thanks, Sara. So, Larry, what's your overall view on the handoff from business to legal?
Tony, having a plan to support the legal team in their negotiations is absolutely critical to achieving an optimal outcome. For example, it's fairly common to encounter situations where an account team will overpromise in order to win or retain the business, and then count on the lawyers to claw back on the RFP compliances. This scenario can play out when translating commercial terms, service levels, and even proposed pricing.
Well, I can see how there might be some negotiation around translating agreed upon commercial terms into actual contract language, but contracting for the agreed upon service levels and pricing should be a straightforward exercise, is it not?
It's not. When it comes to SLAs, expect the legal team and their engineering counterparts to attempt to introduce exemptions and exclusions to the agreed upon service levels that at best water them down or more likely eliminate them altogether. This may manifest itself in country regional exclusions, the number of missed metrics or outages that occur before credits are triggered, and arcane service level achievement calculations. As for the pricing, anyone that works in this space will tell you that the contracting for traditional land services is unduly complex and varies immensely from supplier to supplier. The pricing constructs for emerging services such as SD-WAN, cloud, and all of the as-a-service offerings, as well as managed outsourced services, absolutely require experts from the commercial team to validate with legal that the pricing proposed is what actually makes its way into the contract.
Interesting. Sara, describe to me a situation where not having a coordinated handoff has led to problems in the contracting process.
Oh, sure. So in one instance, an enterprise's consultants were reticent to provide legal with the underlying RFP documents, including the vendor's responses, thinking somehow that they were unnecessary to the drafting of the contract. Not providing the entire set of RFP documents to legal, or at least not providing them in a timely manner, just wasted time that could have been better spent drafting and negotiating. And on that note, actually, it's very helpful to involve legal in drafting or reviewing some of the RFP materials, at least the legal terms and conditions section, so the key provisions are not missed or misstated, which would just frustrate both sides. Involving legal in the RFP process early and then maintaining a strong flow of communication with the handoff helps facilitate alignment between what the RFP required, what the vendor responded with, and what ends up on paper.
All right, Larry, your turn. What are a few of the key risks you see in not having a coordinated handoff from business to legal?
Well, Tony, at a high level, it's critically important to have a well-disciplined plan and approach for the handoff of information between legal and business stakeholders. This should include a reasonable time frame to allow for contracting, a list of RFP items that have been fully, partially, or not complied with, and a prioritization list of the key items that a customer must have included in its contracts. The suppliers are great at keeping negotiation efforts focused on a handful of key items and then running out the contracting clock on everything else. Typically, this results in obtaining the RFP price points in the contract, but with contractual provisions that allow for price changes during the term that effectively moves the market-leading pricing achieved in the RFP back to the middle of the bell curve. Further, without a plan and adequate time, you may not be able to focus on key provisioning obligations, account team support, invoicing and reporting obligations, and other agreed-upon RFP requirements that never make it into your contract. In the past, many of these requirements may have been considered nice to have, but under the current economic conditions and suppliers' efforts to decrease operating costs, if you don't have these requirements in your contract, customers will be required to pay extra for all of them.
Well, it's certainly a lot to think about and begs the question, what can be done? Sara?
Well, a big risk is that the entirety of the business deal never makes it into the final contract. In the case of contracting on the back of an RFP, for example, it's not uncommon to have over 100 pages of supplier compliance to document in the agreement. Layer onto that the reality that you'll likely be amending an existing agreement that was drafted on supplier paper that may have problems all of its own. If not amending an existing agreement, then chances are that you'll be starting from supplier boilerplate that is not customer friendly and is not purpose-built to accommodate custom terms that were negotiated by the business teams. To address this, when working with my colleagues at TC2, we utilize a compliance mapping tool that forces suppliers to map by RFP response section to the actual contract document. For example, where it will reside in the MSA, statement of work, schedule, or attachment. This strategy drives both efficiency and accuracy in the contracting process while obligating the supplier to include each of its compliant positions into the agreement. Now, full disclosure, supplier account and legal teams do not like being strong-armed into utilizing the mapping tool, so the customer needs to be really firm and reinforce the requirement from the start.
Thank you, Sara. Larry, what's the issue around validating the proposed pricing?
Well, first and foremost, you need to conduct a reconciliation of the pricing proposed by the supplier against what is included in the contract. Otherwise, you run the risk of not realizing the financial benefit of the deal you negotiated. First, you need to confirm that all the proposed pricing for the both current and future service elements is included in the draft pricing schedules. I mentioned earlier that the pricing constructs for each supplier vary significantly, so you'll need to be able to reconcile back to your TCO models utilizing the supplier pricing constructs in order to validate. Depending on the size and the amount of churn in the network and the length of time that your sourcing activity takes, you may need to update the baseline of services to capture circuit moves, adds, changes, and disconnects. This is a critical step to make sure you have contracted rates for the services that reflect market pricing achieved while you still have leverage. Finally, it's critically important to have an updated and accurate model of the services and revenue in scope, as this will be the primary input into the calculation of revenue commitment to be included in the deal. Coordinating this activity with legal is key, as the revenue commitment is one of the most, if not the most, important deal constructs.
Thanks, Larry. Sara, any final thoughts or tips for our listeners?
Sure. First, I'd advise enterprise customers to be aware of any terms and conditions in the proposed agreement that negate or conflict with the deal that the business team negotiated. One example is the service order form, which is ostensibly an instrument for ordering circuits, but which can contain individual service or circuit term commitments that conflict with the commercial deal. And next, I just reiterate that it can be very beneficial to engage the legal team before commercial negotiations have concluded, even if in the background. The legal team will benefit from understanding the dynamics of the negotiations to date and the key deal points to focus on. Depending on timing and strategy, the legal team may even be able to leverage the fact that an award of business has not been finalized to strengthen their negotiating position.
Thanks, Sara. Larry, any final thoughts?
Yes, Tony. First, I'd like to reiterate, you must have a plan. Don't assume that when the business deal is closed that your job is done. To the contrary, it's just beginning. Organizing a deal package to hand off to the legal team, including the contract mapping tool that Sara described earlier, is a great start. Requiring that the commercial team from the supplier side is engaged throughout the contracting phase is critical, as well as having access to senior leadership from both the customer and the supplier. Finally, account for the time involved in the contracting process to effectively manage any existing contract terminations and transition activities and to preserve the business case of the new deal.
Okay, thanks, Sara and Larry, for sharing your perspectives and experience on the importance of a coordinated deal handoff from business to legal. You can reach out to Sara, Larry, or me, or any of our TC2 and LB3 colleagues to discuss how to effectively manage your next ICT negotiation or renegotiation. Finally, you can stay up to date by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our website, and by following us on LinkedIn.